Maverick News. The world is watching. In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Strange Bedfellows, episode 37. I'm Lori Spencer. Rick Walker is off tonight, enjoying a Saturday night at home with his family, and we have a wonderful guest for you tonight. I have literally been trying to set this interview up for like 2 months at least. Tonight, our guest is Jack Buckby. He's the author of this wonderful new book about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's called The Truth Teller. And Jack is joining us from Florida. Is that right?
No, never. I've been to Florida once in my life. I'm from New York City.
Where are you?
New York City.
Oh, you're in New York City. Mm-hmm. And what's it like in New York today?
Obviously from England. I'm sure you can tell from the accent, but I live in New York City.
I never heard a New York accent that sounded like that. Nope.
Yeah, I love it here. It's it's got its problems, like LA. I saw LA recently for the first time, going to a Kennedy event, and I was shocked. The homelessness and the drug abuse and the criminality and everything. And we're seeing the same things to a lesser extent here in New York City, and it's a real shame. But personally, I think the best city in the United States. I love it here.
I always loved New York. I have a special place in my heart for it. So I don't know where I got the idea you were in Florida, man.
I would not fare well in Florida. I'm English as they come. I'm too white for that. I go pink the moment the sun comes out. It would not work for me.
Yeah, that's right. And, on Strange Bedfellows, I always like to hear, because we're a political talk show, and I'm interested in the journey that people take politically. And your story is particularly fascinating to me. And we've talked about this off the air, but I wanted to bring you on the show and find out more about your political journey through life and where you started politically and how you've evolved and how that brought you to supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because you come from a very conservative background, and I want to hear more about that. So tell me about your life growing up in England, how you got into politics, and how you got here.
Well, there's a story. Let's go right back to the beginning, I guess. So age 15, I'm a young kid. I'm in Skelmersdale, which is a town just outside of Liverpool in northern England, a former mining town, industrial town, a very working class. And age 15, I'm sort of beginning to engage in politics, and I'm learning about the world and figuring out what I want to do. And I wanted to go into the arts originally. But my life got completely derailed by a couple of things. First of all, 2008, we had the financial crisis and people were losing their jobs. And you start to see some discrepancies between what the media and the politicians tell you and what's actually happening in real life. And in real life, what we saw is that people were losing their jobs, and immigration, or at least large-scale immigration, wasn't necessarily a good thing for everybody, because I knew people who were losing their jobs, and there were people working either illegally or legally for less than minimum wage in our town because of European Union rules that allowed it. And so I started thinking, well, that's not fair. And then I also became aware of the Muslim grooming gang scandal, which some people in the States are familiar with, but I'll quickly wrap that one up. It's a scandal that really emerged in the early 2010s, but we knew about it in the 2000s. It was gangs of mostly Muslim men systematically raping and abusing young non-Muslim girls. So not just white girls, but Sikh girls and anyone who wasn't Muslim.
I remember that.
Towns. Yeah, and it's a problem that goes on to this day with the Alexis J. report and the inquiry found that in a period of, I think it was 20 years, 1,400 young girls were abused, and the police tore up paperwork and reports of what was going on because they were terrified of the consequences of saying, look, this is a problem. It's, culturally and religiously motivated, nobody wanted to talk about that. And so me as a young kid, knowing victims of this and being aware of what was going on, I decided to become politically active. And the problem was the only party back then that was talking about those contentious issues happened to be a white nationalist party called the British National Party.
The BNP, yeah, the British
BNP.
Nationalist Party.
And in
National
2009,
Party, yeah.
yeah, in 2009, they took 1 million votes across the UK, which is a lot. So there's 60 million people in the UK and probably maybe 30 or 40 million voters, something like that. They got 1 million votes, and I was one of the people campaigning with them. And that kind of took me in this wild direction, you know. And looking back now, I'm obviously not involved with that stuff anymore. And I've spent many years writing about counter-extremism issues and how we can more effectively de-radicalize young people who are pulled into extremist organizations. Because one of the arguments that I often make is that extremism typically does not occur in a void. It usually happens for a reason, and often the reason is that contentious issues go unaddressed. And, you know, looking back on all that, I think that it's honestly astounding that I, of all people, ended up in these, you know, ultra right-wing movements. When really, I'm pretty liberal. I'm very into the art world, and I've never been big on guns. I'm not really a Republican in the American sense. Really, what I am is kind of a liberal who's conservative on some issues, maybe like immigration, but that's not necessarily even a conservative issue.
It shouldn't be, in my opinion.
No, it shouldn't. And, you know, it wasn't up until a few years ago. Remember, there was a time when Bernie Sanders was, you know, in favor of regulating immigration better.
I remember.
So I've had some really wild experiences over the last 15, 16 years. And, you know, young men that I knew growing up from the same town and from the same area who saw the same problems I did were not necessarily as lucky as me. And I count myself lucky in that I was able to get out of that movement all those years ago. Doesn't mean that I'm not still disparaged and smeared and lied about to this day. If you Google me, there's quite a different story. What you see is all this stuff from years ago. Half of it's untrue. Nobody wants to accept that I'm not the person I was because I happen to not be an ultra progressive. And the only way that anyone can leave the far right and to be accepted by the media or anyone like that is to become an ultra progressive. And that's not de-radicalization. That's radicalization to the other side.
Exactly. I'm curious about something. What was your turning point? What made you leave or wake up to the kind of movement that you were in and say, hey, this isn't for me at all?
So many years after I left, a young man that I knew was arrested, and I believe is in prison for the rest of his life now, or technically a life sentence, whatever that means these days, because he tried to murder our local member of parliament. And that was a kid that I knew. You know, he never struck me as particularly or any more extreme than I was back in the day. And I think it was 2018 that I found out about that. And that was long after I'd left. And that really sticks with me to this day. And that's what really got me writing about extremism. But 2018 was long after I left too. So the reason I mention that is it's not just a switch that goes off. Think of it as grooming indoctrination. I was groomed from a young age, not just by people within the party, but even the leader of the party. I was being tipped in the media as the next leader of the party. I was 16, 17, 18 years old. I mean, that's pretty wild. So it was really a grooming process. And once I left the white nationalist world, I still felt that some of those issues that got me into politics in the first place still weren't being talked about. It was still racist to say that we should control our borders better. And so I and it was still, wrong to talk about the grooming gang issue. And I thought, well, I still have to champion those issues, even if I'm leaving behind the white nationalism that plagued the party that I was involved with. So I ended up in the counter-jihad world. And that, was less extreme, but still came with some odd and troublesome characters. And so I spent many years in that world. And then I just sort of found myself in the conservative world and thought, well, maybe these are maybe I was just naturally conservative all along. And even there, I realized, no, this just isn't me. I was radicalized by a couple of issues that, frankly, liberals should have been talking about all along. And here I am, all those years later, filled with regret in some ways, but also thankful that I learned how that process works. And even if I have to be a lone voice in this fight, I will keep writing my books. I will keep writing papers detailing how we can more effectively de-radicalize people, and not only de-radicalize, prevent people from becoming radicalized in the first place, which is why I like Kennedy.
Yes, right. And that's what I loved about your book, which we're going to talk about here in a few moments, because it's not just a biography of Robert F. Kennedy. It's really more about the journey that all of us are on, and your particular journey coming from the far right, sort of, as you get older and wiser. I think it's true of all of us. We tend to drift more towards the center, where things are more logical, and we might be conservative on some issues, progressive on some other issues, and eclectic in our politics, which I consider a good thing. And what we're going through right now is that evolutionary process. That's why the majority of Americans now identify themselves as independent. I think they're feeling alienated by both the left and the right as the Republican Party continues to get more extreme. And same for the Democrats. Some of their policies are just completely wacky, far left policies that are not in step with the majority of sane, regular Americans out there, the silent majority, if you will. But I wanted to talk a little bit with you briefly about your breaking away from the extremist groups that you were involved with and how they reacted when you left. It's kind of like leaving a cult, they're going to punish you for that. And you were punished very harshly because you were a public face of the movement, right? And in your book, you write about some of the political activists who became kind of obsessed with destroying you. They tried to break up your marriage. They called the FBI. This was back in 2017, falsely claiming that you were a terrorist planning to commit terrorist acts inside the United States. And because of that fake tip, you were banned from entering the United States for 5 years at a time when you were married to an American, right?
Yeah, that's true. I tell this story, and every time I tell it, I have to do the caveat. I have to go, I'm not a terrorist. I promise.
Right.
It's such a wild story.
I swear.
But it's true. So in 2016, 2017, my wife, whose family comes from Yugoslavia, they're all, as you can imagine, Republican for the most part, having left communism. And so she's always naturally just been a Republican. But she happened to work in the liberal arts scene in New York City, and she was a nightlife personality. I say personality, she was a performance artist in some of the most legendary venues in New York City. And people found out that she was voting Trump, and they lost their minds.
I bet.
They wanted to punish her, and they did. So they ruined her career. She lost all of her work. She's not worked since 2017. She lost her agent. She lost every gig she's ever had. She lost everything because people refused to work with her, and then they smeared her, as they usually do, with all the usual stuff. But they went really too far. I mean, they already went too far doing that, but they went really too far when they called up the FBI, and they said that I was a terrorist. And at the time, we were engaged, and we became married while I was still banned from America, and I had to sue the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and Department of State in order to, I had a visa that was stuck. They denied me after this call and after this fake tip, and the visa was just stuck in limbo forever. So I had to sue them to make a decision, and it took 5 years. And the best answer we got from the FBI through a congressman, because we had several members of Congress helping me with this, is that, you got stuck in the system because of the fake tip, and nobody wanted to be the person that said, no, this guy's actually fine. Because if you're the guy that says he's fine, and it turns out I'm not, then they get in trouble.
Yes.
So 5 years while we were trying to start our life together, I've been in America for 3 years now, but I've still spent most of my relationship with my wife in a different country to her because of that.
Wow, what a story. Yeah. That is just astonishing to me. So I'm curious, the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Gaza war that's going on right now, and you see, of course, you're right there in the heart of it in New York City, which has more of these big protests going on than probably anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
So you're on the front lines of what's happening right now, and I'm just interested to get your thoughts on that, because how does that relate to where you came from in your political background, and have you evolved on that issue as well?
Well, I, even back in those days when I was like 15 to 20, I would say, are the white nationalist years, when I was involved with those parties and that kind of movement. And even back then, I was a strong supporter of Israel. Not that the media ever mentioned that, because they just wanted to focus on the fact that the people I was allied with were, former neo-Nazis and things like that. I've never, ever wavered on my support of Israel, and I've never been an anti-Semite in any way. So I've never personally changed. What I will say, you're certainly right about New York City. People in my neighborhood and around my neighborhood, they've had huge protests, effectively riots, in the name of Palestine, where they're throwing projectiles off roofs of buildings at the police. We had a police officer on every single street corner in our neighborhood one day. It was really scary. But
Do you live close to one of the universities there that's protesting?
No, what happened is I live in Brooklyn, so they just did a march through Brooklyn and just disrupt these entire communities for the day. But isn't it fascinating that, let me tell you, the anti-Semitism that I see from the modern left today is on par, if not worse, than what I saw in the white nationalist movement in my teens.
I see that too, and it scares the crap out of me, especially when I see them now merging with the far right neo-Nazi groups. They've found a common cause,
I mean, it was always there, but they kind of it was never this pronounced. It was never this out in the open.
I know.
You heard anti-Zionism back, when I was involved with that stuff when I was younger. You thought far right, but and now when you think anti-Zionism, that doesn't even pop into my head anymore, because frankly, they're in the backseat on this issue. It's been mainstreamed.
Right. And, historically, anti-Zionism was more of a invention by the communists in the Soviet Union. They had this whole study of what they call Zionology. And, so much of that was back in the 60s, the KGB, the communists were infiltrating the American left, the new left, if you will. And we saw that happening on college campuses during the 6-Day War of 1967, and more of the radicalization of the left, of course. There are many parallels to the 1968 race. Interestingly, when Bobby Kennedy's father, Robert Kennedy Sr., was running for president, and he strongly supported Israel, like all of the Kennedys did. And he voted as senator to send 50 Phantom jets to Israel for self-defense. And somewhere in Pasadena, California, a young Palestinian man named Sirhan was infuriated by Kennedy's position on Israel. And, he too was radicalized. He's from Palestine. He grew up there as a child, witnessing the 1948 war, was displaced in the Nakba. He had all kinds of reasons to feel the way that he did, but he focused in on Robert Kennedy and made Robert Kennedy the center of his anger and his obsession, and the man that he decided must die. Sirhan kept diaries before he went to the Ambassador Hotel on June 5th, 1968, and shot Robert Kennedy and 5 other innocent bystanders in the Ambassador Hotel pantry. He had a diary that he'd kept, and in the diary he scribbled 1,000 times, over and over and over again, RFK must die, RFK must die, RFK must be assassinated by June 5th. And he picked that particular date because that was the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the 6-Day War between Israel and their Arab neighbors. And there's a clip that I'd like to show you, Jack. I think it's very interesting. I've been doing a series called Who Killed Bobby Kennedy? It's like a 6-part podcast series where we take a deep dive into the evidence presented at the Sirhan trial. This year marks the 55th anniversary of that trial. It was a 4-month trial in the spring of 1969. And it's been fascinating to go back and review the evidence for both the prosecution and the defense. And we go in depth on that to sort of explain to people, because it's timely right now, obviously, with the Gaza war, that people understand the history of this conflict. It didn't just start on October 7th, obviously. This has been going on since 1948. And it's relevant to this campaign, of course, obviously, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also supporting Israel, running for president at a time when that's a kind of an unpopular position with a lot of his followers. But this is an interview and it's one of the few interviews with Sirhan Sirhan's father, who left the United States and went back to Jordan. And this was during Sirhan's trial. It was after he'd been convicted by the jury, and it was the penalty phase of the trial when they were debating whether or not to give him the death penalty. And in fact, the jury did give him the death penalty, and that later changed a few years later when California struck down the death penalty. But a reporter caught up with Sirhan's dad, and I find this clip absolutely remarkable. It's like he had a crystal ball. He was warning us. This is in April of 1969, and he's telling us what the future is going to look like.
Mr. Sirhan. Yes. Do you think there will be an appeal?
Well, I think there is going to be an appeal, and there is going to be more than this. More than this. And I want to say this to the court, and I want to mention the American people too. They shouldn't keep quiet for the action which took against Sirhan in the court, because this action is going to bring more trouble to the Americans, to the leaders of the United States, and this which I don't want. They should think a little further. They should think about the reason which pushed Sirhan to kill Senator Kennedy. And I want to advise the leaders of the United States and the whole leaders in the world to take a real action, to take a real steps for peace. Otherwise, there will be more trouble and more trouble and more trouble. And this is against my will. And if they keep sticking to put Sirhan in the gas chamber or to give him a life in prison, I am sure this will have a reaction all over the world.
And he was right. 2 years later, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was a communist liberation group, went on a hijacking spree. You're probably not old to remember this, Jack, but some of our older viewers remember the 1970s when passenger airliners were routinely hijacked by these Palestinian terrorist groups, these liberation groups. And in 1970, they hijacked 5 passenger planes. 3 of them were headed for New York City. And by the way, the plan was, which fortunately did not come to pass, they planned to bring those airlines to New York City and blow them up over the skies of New York. And the date was September 11th, 1970.
It's wild.
Yeah, let that sink in. But, you know, they tried to hijack 5 planes, only succeeded in hijacking 4 because one of the planes was an Israeli airline, El Al, and they knew how to deal with skyjackers. That pilot was a hero. He was like, not this plane, not today, terrorist. So that's the one plane that didn't get hijacked. The other 4 were successfully hijacked. And the Palestinian terrorists demanded the release of Sirhan Sirhan from prison. President Nixon said, nope, not going to negotiate with terrorists, not going to happen. And so they let the hostages go, but they blew up the planes.
Wow.
Two of them were blown up on the tarmac in Cairo. Another one was blown up on the runway in Amman, Jordan. And that all happened on September 11th, 1970. It's the craziest thing. And then 2 years later, in 1972, Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s older brother, Joseph Kennedy, who was a former congressman from the state of Massachusetts, he was 19 years old. He was on a flight out of Greece, and he got hijacked by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They chose that flight because the son of Robert Kennedy was on board. They held him hostage, again, demanding the release of Sirhan Sirhan from prison. Fortunately, he was released. That one ended peacefully without any hostages actually being killed. And this went on and on through the 1970s and 1980s. There was the 1973 incident when the Black September group broke into the U.S. Embassy at Khartoum in Saudi Arabia and took 9 of our diplomats hostage, again demanded the release of Sirhan Sirhan. They think Sirhan is a hero in the Palestinian liberation movement, right, for assassinating Bobby Kennedy. And once again, President Nixon said no, not going to negotiate, not going to release Sirhan, and they killed the hostages, including 3 Americans, and tortured them terribly before they killed them. So I think a lot of the younger people out there who go to Ivy League schools were never taught this history, or they were taught it in such an inverted way that they don't understand that these Palestinian terrorists are not the good guys.
I mean, it really speaks to the morality of the people educating them. I mean, not only is it reprehensible that they're championing the cause of a clearly terrorist organization to begin with, but the violence that it inspires, often because they feel that it's justified violence. And that's true on the far left, and it's true on the far right. On the far left, we see, the disgusting things that I've seen online written about Jews by left-wing progressives. Yeah. Disgusting, violent things. And this is coming from, again, they feel justified in saying it. And I'll tell you, when I was leaving the far right in my late teens, there was an organization in Liverpool, which, that was my city. That I studied there. And it's the city that I spent the most time in when I grew up. But there was a neo-Nazi organization there that knew of me, that the police had warned me about. I met with the police. They contacted me saying that my life was in danger. And I spoke to them about it, and they told me about this organization. They told me that I was on their stab on sight list, and their stab on sight list was for Zionist collaborators, or whatever the hell it was they were calling me at the time. And the irony being, I knew very little, frankly. When I say very little, I knew enough, but it wasn't my main issue. It was not my main issue. It was not something I talked about all the time. I think I'd happened to say that I stood on the side of the Jews and the side of Israel, and that immediately put a target on my back. So, the far right, the far left, is really disturbing to see.
It's the horseshoe effect.
It is.
It's a thing. It's real. They're coming together and building a movement that honestly scares the crap out of me. There's a new podcast out this week that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's got his own podcast, and he's got a series called The Path to Peace about the Middle East conflict. And today he had a discussion actually with a friend of mine, John Aziz, who's a Palestinian and an Israeli. And, Bobby does this as sort of listening sessions. He's not there to lecture anyone about what should be done. He wants to hear from the Israelis and from the Palestinians. Both are peace activists on what they think is best for the Middle East, because I personally don't think, and I think Bobby agrees, it's not the place of the United States or even the United Nations to tell these two parties what's best for them, what's best for their region. It's like this two-state solution delusion that Bobby supports the two-state solution. It's one of the things I actually disagree with him on. I think that since October 7th, whatever hope there may have been for a two-state solution is just out the window.
I don't see how it can. Listen, I I want to see them resolve it in a way that works for them both, or at least works for the non-aggressor. I think you're right. In an ideal world, the two-state solution, that's what everyone wants, and it's been offered God knows how many times and been rejected every single time.
Correct.
I would like to see it happen, but I mean, who knows? I mean, I even know people on the Israeli side of things who are angry with Netanyahu, and they think that maybe he's stirring the pot intentionally. I don't know. Again, this has never been my issue because I'm not an Israeli and I'm not Jewish. But does that mean that I'm never going to, ideologically be on side of them, or at least on the side of peace? Absolutely, I'm going to be on that side. But it's never something I've claimed to be so involved in that I think the United States or the United Kingdom should be dramatically pulling the strings and telling them what to do.
Right. And the UK, I mean, good Lord, Great Britain started this mess in the first place. I mean, they're responsible for so much of the trouble in the Middle East that we have today. So, yeah, they'd probably be the last ones that I would trust to work out a solution.
The Brits might have a different view on that one.
Yep.
The Brits' view is the same for America. It's and frankly, it's Bush, really. The Brits, if you ask any Brit about Bush, is like, that bastard dragging us into wars we don't need to be involved in.
And Tony Blair helped. He helped drag you into those wars
big
too.
Time. Yeah, he's not popular.
I was curious to ask you, I know you said you're not like expert level on the RFK assassination, but I was curious what, if any, thoughts you had on it. Do you think that Sirhan did it? Do you think he was a mind-controlled patsy, or somebody else fired the shots? You got any thoughts on it?
So let me tell you, this is funny for someone who wrote a book about Kennedy, but I'm very open about it in the book. I knew practically nothing about the Kennedys before I saw him in this race. I knew the basics, but I knew practically nothing in terms of detail, certainly about RFK Jr. And it was watching him running in the race as a Democrat. And initially I was thinking, well, it's hard for me to support Democrat. And then I heard him talk more and more and more. And actually, he helped confirm something for me. I already had it in my head that, maybe I'm not the conservative that I thought I was, or maybe this isn't the political realm that I should have ever been involved with in the first place. And I was kind of getting there anyway, but seeing Kennedy and seeing him run as a Democrat and finding myself agreeing with practically everything he was saying, it gave me hope that maybe there was room in the Democratic Party, for normal Democrats of the days of old to come back. And
nope.
That didn't happen.
We found out, didn't we?
But the reason I'm saying that is what happened is once I saw him and once I started, ending that journey and him helping me realize, what was going on, I read as much as I could about him, and I read the biographies about him, and I just was so impressed with him as a man, as a candidate, and all the stuff about his family and the assassinations. It's all fascinating stuff, but frankly, I've since discovering him and his family, I've only had the time to write the book and focus on this campaign than any of that history. So I have stacks of books that I need to pick up on after this race is over.
There's a book I would recommend. I think it would speak to you if you decide to do some investigating and go down that RFK assassination rabbit hole. There's a book about Sirhan called The Forgotten Terrorist by Mel Aiton, also a British author. In fact, I was talking to you about Mel the other day.
Yeah.
He's working on a new book, a biography of Sirhan. And he had a deal inked with his publisher, and now because of the Gaza war, the publisher seems to be getting cold feet about do they really want to offend the woke mob, the pro-Hamas woke mob? But this week, Dr. Cyril Wecht passed away at the age of 93. I loved Dr. Wecht. He was a forensic pathologist. Of course, most people know him from his groundbreaking work on the JFK assassination. But he also consulted the coroner, Dr. Noguchi, on the RFK autopsy. And I wanted to play you a very brief clip here of Dr. Wecht talking about the RFK assassination and what his conclusion was, because it carries quite a bit of weight.
Well, Robert Kennedy was assassinated 50 years ago next week. Now his son is calling for a new investigation.
Robert Kennedy Jr. met face-to-face last year with the man convicted in his father's murder and says that the gunman is falsely accused. And there is at least one other person in Pittsburgh who agrees. Ralph Iannotti reports.
Forensic pathologist and former Allegheny County coroner Dr. Cyril Wecht has long held the belief that there was a second gunman who fatally shot Senator Robert Kennedy on that June night in 1968. With Kennedy's son now calling to reopen the investigation, Dr. Wecht is hoping Americans, once and for all, will learn the truth about what happened that night in California.
The shot that killed Senator Robert Kennedy was fired 1 to 1.5 inches away from his head, just above and behind the right ear.
Dr. Cyril Wecht, at age 87, has performed and or consulted in tens of thousands of autopsies or postmortems over the past more than half a century.
Now it's on to Chicago and let's win there. Thank you very much.
He was not directly involved in the autopsy on Robert Kennedy after the senator died in June 1968, but he was a consultant in the case to then L.A. coroner Dr. Thomas Noguchi.
Sirhan is in front of him. Sirhan shoots, bang, bang, bang. And no way, at any time, in any scenario, in any version, no matter how incredibly, wildly embellished, was Sirhan behind Robert Kennedy.
Dr. Wecht says Sirhan was never behind Senator Kennedy. That's in black and white in the autopsy report. And although the autopsy results were clearly spelled out, Sirhan's defense attorney, Grant Cooper, who died in 1990, for some reason effectively ignored that information at Sirhan's trial.
An experienced criminal defense attorney never consulted a forensic pathologist, a criminalist, a ballistics expert going into the case to review things. Never had such testimony by such experts for the defense.
And Dr. Wecht says the L.A. County coroner wasn't the only person who called him after the Kennedy assassination. Someone else reached out to him very close to the accused killer.
Well before the trial, I got a call asking me to be Sirhan's lawyer. From whom? From his mother. His mother called me and asked me if I would be her son's lawyer.
Ralph Iannotti, KDKA TV News.
You know what's kind of interesting about that? Sirhan's mother, Mary Sirhan, when all those hijackings of airliners was going on back in the 70s and the Palestinian hijackers were demanding that we release Sirhan from prison, the reason that they did not kill all of those hundreds of hostages that they had was Sirhan's mother, Mary, held a press conference along with a couple of his brothers. And they implored the hijackers not to kill the hostages. They said, don't do this in Sirhan's name. It's not what he would want. Wow. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting to me that the woke mob, the pro-Hamas, I believe, woke mob, is having quite an impact on electoral politics this year, right? You've got President Biden, who on paper supports Israel, but out of the other side of his mouth, he's doing everything that he can to appease and kowtow and take a knee to the woke mob. Maybe it's just an electoral calculation he's making, that he's trying to win those votes in Michigan and Minnesota.
Well, you'll be amazed to hear, I'm sure, that in the UK, elections are already being fought and won on the Gaza issue.
Yep.
In the UK, George Galloway was elected to Parliament in a by-election.
That's right.
Off the back of Gaza.
Exactly. One issue got George elected. And George is a friend of mine. We disagree. Yeah, we disagree vehemently on this issue. But I've been a guest on the mother of all talk shows many times, and I adore George. So
he's an interesting man. I'll say that.
He is. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
And you know, it's the last 7 months, Jack, I know you can relate, has really put a lot of our friendships to the test, hasn't it? No matter which side of the issue you're on, you're going to have friends and family members who don't agree with you on it.
I feel like I'm in a perpetual state of losing friends. It's just one thing after another. Brexit was particularly bad. I remember hosting a Brexit party on the night of the vote, and I had friends over and we had some drinks and we watched the results came in, and in the middle of the night it looked like we'd lost. It looked like we were going to stay in the European Union. My friends had a chuckle. I said, hey, it is what it is. We lost. Good night. See you. And people left. And then in the middle of the night, it suddenly reversed course. And it turns out Brexit won. And the next morning, friends who I, laughed with and shared nice moments with were completely gone by the next day.
That sounds like what happened here after the election of 2016.
Yeah.
The very next day, after Trump won, I had tons of people unfriend me on Facebook.
Yeah.
Because I supported Trump. I voted for him that time. But then I learned my lesson because Trump broke so many of his promises. He let me down when he promised to release all the secret JFK files, and then he didn't. He also took a knee to the mob, although that time it was the deep state mob. That told him, I wouldn't release that stuff if I were you. And he's like, oh, okay, I won't.
Yeah.
So he took a knee to them. He took a knee to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. And
to BLM, frankly.
And to BLM.
The BLM issue, I think, is more nuanced than people like to sort of position it as. And what I've written in the past is that in the same way that I believe we shouldn't take far-right extremism lightly, in the sense that it's driven by real issues. I think the BLM riots and Antifa riots were driven in part by real issues too, but also you have these leaders who are willing to perpetually lie or exaggerate or falsify information to rile up the people on their own side. And so what I was telling people in 2020, when Trump was tweeting law and order and doing nothing about it, is that don't take these riots lightly. Don't just brush off the issues that people are trying to talk about. At the very least, you need to communicate to other people like human beings and be thoroughly decent and listen. That's something I've failed at in the past and something I try to do better at now that I'm older and wiser. But Trump really let me down with that, because he had an opportunity to use law enforcement as it should have been used, but also address the issue in a way that maybe brought people together. And I think he utterly failed on both counts. That's
right. And we won't even get into COVID because we're on YouTube and they don't like it when we talk about that stuff here. So
I've had enough of being cancelled. Let's maybe
yeah.
That one.
And besides, I want this interview to be seen. I don't want it to get censored. This is an important conversation that we're having. And you wrote in your book, and I thought this was so important, you wrote, to understand the common ground between Trump voters and Democrats, we must recognize that not all Trump voters are extremists or radicals. For some Democrats, this is hard to believe. Likewise, not all Democrats are woke progressives, a fact that some Trump voters may find hard to believe. And I thought you just nailed it there, because we will never get anywhere. We will never be able to heal this divide unless we can stop demonizing the other side. The Gaza conflict is yet another way to divide us. Issues like gun control and abortion. How many times just in the last week have we seen Robert Kennedy Jr. called a baby killer because he's pro-choice? And he's not into killing babies. And he's also been called a genocide supporter because he supports Israel. I mean, these are extreme words that people use to demonize the opponent without really looking at the issue.
We're all human beings, and we're all human beings with our own experiences. And one thing that I disagree with on the right, and the people that I know fantastic people on the right, fantastic conservatives who I love dearly. But one of the things I see is that, lived experience counts for nothing. That's not true. Lived experience counts for a lot. You gain a lot of wisdom, and everyone has different experiences. My experience is unique in many ways, and I think that has allowed me to do some good in helping young people leave extremism. I've done more good, frankly, than some government programs in the UK. I'll say that. So lived experience counts. And the reason I mention that is, think about if you're a Republican and you believe in the Second Amendment, but there's a family who lost a child from gun crime and they oppose the Second Amendment. Are you going to look at them as just adversaries because they disagree with you? Or are you going to consider actually what happened to them was absolutely traumatic, truly something you would never wish on anybody? and maybe you think they're wrong in their approach to solving the problem, wouldn't you rather have a conversation with them about finding where they may be right, where you may be right, and what is achievable and sensible and down the middle? Or are you just going to blast them as, anti-American people who want to take our guns away? That's not the way to go about things. That perpetuates division. It doesn't help anybody. And I'll also say there's a study that I really love, and I mention it in any interview that I can, and it was mentioned in my book from 2020, Monster of Their Own Making. It's called The Perception Gap. And the Perception Gap asked people of different political stripes questions about what they think their political opponents believe. And what they found is that the vast majority of people are completely incapable of accurately, and that's the key word, accurately describing the political opinions and views of their political opponents. And amazingly, what they found is actually it's slightly more of a problem on the left, but particularly a problem with academics. And what they found is that every single degree somebody earns, they're less capable of describing the opinions and beliefs of their opponents.
Interesting. That does make so much sense, though, because academics, especially leftist ones, are some of the most intolerant people that I've ever seen.
And they're the people who are promoting the Hamas stuff, and the people who are riling people up to rally in the street. And the study showed us that actually people are in agreement a lot more than they think they are. And again, this is why I like Kennedy, because he speaks to that truth. It's not just a soundbite. It's not just wishy-washy nonsense because you're just trying to, escape the two-party system and find an excuse to be an independent. That's not what this is. He's an independent because that is true. He's an independent because a plurality of Americans consider themselves independents now, and they do agree more than they disagree, even on the most contentious issues.
Absolutely. And what better evidence could you see of that than this week when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. collected enough ballot petition signatures to get on the ballot in Texas? Yeah. Texas, the red state where they love their guns, and they've got an abortion ban that's controversial, and it's considered Trump country largely, and yet he's embraced there. Sorry?
My wife thinks it's hilarious. I call it the rooty tooty point and shooty state.
Well, Texas is my home state, and I lived in Austin for 25 years, and that is where Robert Kennedy Jr. and Nicole Shanahan were a couple of nights ago when they announced that they had collected enough signatures and filed the paperwork to officially be on the Texas ballot. That is huge.
It's massive.
Texas and California, huge electoral states, and everyone said that couldn't be done because it's really, really hard for independent and third-party candidates to qualify for the Texas ballot. They rig the system against third-party and independent candidates, and they only give you like 8 weeks to go out and collect about 200,000 signatures. It's really hard, and that's why there hasn't been anybody on the ballot in many, many, many years.
Well, when I've run for election in the past, they required 10 signatures, and that was difficult enough in some cases.
Wow.
So 200,000 in a couple of weeks is crazy. And I believe as of Thursday this week, they have now another state. I forget which one it was.
New York, your state.
New York, yeah. And it's 201 electoral votes they have now. And talking of being rigged, the CNN debate, which I wrote about recently, the CNN debate, which Trump and Biden both said will do it as long as Kennedy's not on the ballot, not on the stage. CNN set out their own regulations, rules saying, well, if he qualifies, if he has 15% over full polls, and if he has 270, then he can still come on. Well, that's rigged too, if you think about it, because it's all very well and good for Trump and for Biden, who have these enormous parties behind them. They're on the ballot everywhere. But Kennedy, it's a formality more than anything. He's going to be on the ballot in every single state. He will. Everyone knows that he will, but he might not qualify for the CNN thing just on the basis that he doesn't technically have his name on every ballot so far. That's the system being rigged against him too.
Absolutely. And that first debate coming up in June, I don't think that there's any way if that's the criteria. Bobby probably won't be able to get into that debate because of the path to 270. It takes a while to explain this to our viewers. When you're an independent candidate and you have to do petition drives to get ballot access, even after you turn in your paperwork, and it's not official until the state certifies it. It means they got to go through every petition, analyze every signature. They might throw some out that they think are questionable, and they often do that as a trick to keep independent candidates off the ballot. They'll just disqualify a lot of signatures for sometimes arbitrary reasons.
Yeah.
And I expect that his ballot access is going to be challenged. There could be legal battles. And so this is all going to delay the certification process. At this point, that's like a month from now. I can't see how he could meet that high bar by June. Now, the second debate is in September, I believe September 10th. By that time, hopefully this will all be worked out and he will be certified on enough ballots to qualify. But yes, it's just so obvious that that's what they're doing, is to knock him out of the debates. And Biden, in his ground rules to even do this debate, he made it clear that it would be a one-on-one with Trump, which basically means Kennedy's out.
Well, and also what this means is that the debates that were meant to be organized by the Commission on Presidential Debates, are they going to happen? No word on that. I think what will likely, because remember, these are not the official debates. These are just debates that Biden said he would set up as long as you could, follow these ground rules. There's no certainty that any other debates will happen. And probably what will happen is Biden and Trump, Trump jumped on this, by the way, and accepted every demand that Biden made. Every single one. Under normal circumstances, do you really think Trump would have been happy with the names that Biden picked out of a hat to moderate the debate? No. Under normal circumstances, Trump would say, no, they're biased, they hate Trump, and I'm not doing it. But he jumped at it. And the reason he jumped at it is because both of them realized here is a way to get around the commission's rules that would have allowed Kennedy on the stage, guaranteed, frankly, let's be honest, as close to guaranteed as possible. Now they know that this was a way that they could say, well, actually, we won't do it unless Kennedy's out. And they got their way. So well done. I don't think Kennedy's going to be on that stage. I don't think it's going to happen. I hope it does. And I think it would change the race dramatically if he did. But frankly, that's the reason why they're pulling out all the stops to stop him.
I couldn't agree more. And I would recommend everybody out there check out Jack's new piece. He just published that this week in the National Interest, right? It's the publication. I think you called it, my friend. And a lot of people inside our campaign aren't happy to admit that you're probably right, that he won't be included in those debates. Now, we're raising hell about it. Hell, I don't know. Bobby might even sue because it just seems so wrong. I don't know if it's illegal, but it certainly is unethical and wrong, and I hope that there is some legal recourse where he can be included. I think that I've even seen Democrats out there who are planning to vote for Joe Biden withhold their donations to Biden's campaign unless he includes Robert Kennedy in the debates.
I mean, we'll have to see that kind of pressure placed on them for it to happen.
That's right.
And I actually do think Trump is being honest for once when he says that Kennedy needs to get his numbers up. I think what's happening behind the scenes is that Trump knows Kennedy is a threat, but his advisors are likely telling him, listen, he's a threat, but right now, actually, you're probably going to scrape a win against Biden. And if Kennedy's numbers do continue to go up and Trump sees that actually maybe he could lose to Biden with Kennedy in the race, at that point, I think Trump might accept the debate. I think he might. But
Trump, I mean, Biden, he needs to worry about Kennedy, but Trump needs to worry a lot more about losing votes to Bobby Kennedy. All of the internal polling that we've seen and external polling shows that, more than half of Kennedy's supporters say that if he wasn't in the race, if he drops out, that they will vote for Trump. About 57%. So, that'll give Trump heartburn, I would think. But I just love it because he's giving them both heartburn. And it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? I enjoy seeing it. And I'm going to play you a clip from the Austin rally this week on Tuesday. Bobby and Nicole were there in Austin, my hometown, to celebrate getting ballot access in the great state of Texas. And here's what he had to say about both Biden and Trump.
We have two presidents who are running today, two ex-presidents. One is the current president. They both had 4 years in office. They couldn't be more different than each other. If you look at their personalities, their dispositions, how they relate to the world, the ideology that drives them, that they articulate all the time. They couldn't be more different. But the issues that they're actually disputing on are a very narrow Overton window. It's what Nicole was saying. It's guns, it's abortion, it's the border, it's trans rights. These issues that are all important, but none of them are existential. None of them are the issues that really matter to you, to me, to our children. The issues that really matter, they never talk about. Nicole said they're starting a little to talk about it because our campaign is forcing them to do it. We have a $34 trillion debt. The service on that debt is now costing us more than our defense budget. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we spend is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100% of every dollar we collect in taxes is going to service the debt. Have you ever heard of President Trump talking about how he's going to end the debt crisis? Have you ever heard of President Biden talking about it? Oh, they can't talk about it because they're the ones who ran up the debt. Half of that $34 trillion came from them. President Trump spent $8 trillion, ran up for $8 trillion during his term. It was more at that time than every president of the United States, from George Washington to George W. Bush, 283 years of history. President Trump came into office saying, I'm going to run it like a business. I'm a businessman. Trust me, we need a businessman to run it like a business. Exactly. And then he closed down all of our businesses. 3.3 million businesses. Who would do that? Who would do that? Do you want a president who's going to close down all of our businesses? Well, we have two presidents who've shown that they're willing to do that. And he ran up, he shifted $4 trillion from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. And another issue, that this is an existential issue for our country. We cannot keep running on this debt. We need to figure out a way to invest in things that are actually going to grow our economy rather than more wars. President Trump and President Biden, President Trump did say that he was going to end the war machine. But then he brought John Bolton in to run NSA. Oh, he put a swamp creature in charge of draining the swamp. And then 2 weeks ago, he gave a big bear hug to Speaker Johnson and to President Biden, and they agreed to send $64 billion more over to Ukraine. Wouldn't you rather that $64 billion be spent here in the United States? Don't we need that country? Don't we need that money here in our country to improve our schools, to improve our healthcare system, to figure out ways to end this mental health epidemic that is destroying our children? Last year, we had the highest suicide rate in our history. We had the highest cancer rate in our history. We have the highest heart disease rate. It's not just chronic disease. It's not just the neurological disorders that are afflicting our kids. The autism that's gone 1 in 10,000 in my generation and 70-year-old men today, to 1 in every 22 boys in my kids' generation, 1 in every 34 kids. It's not just the obesity epidemic. It's not just the allergy, the food allergies. The autoimmune diseases like juvenile diabetes that are devastating this generation. It's all these other injuries that are making our kids and our people sicker and sicker and sicker. Have you ever heard President Trump talk about how he's going to end the chronic disease epidemic? No. Don't you want a president who's going to be thinking about those things? When I get into office, I am going to end the chronic disease epidemic.
It's true. I have never heard President Trump address any of those issues, or President Biden.
No, and the issues that they talk about can be batted around for years, and at the end of the day, it won't bloody matter when the debt becomes completely unserviceable. He's absolutely right. And when Kennedy says that these issues are more important than the culture war stuff, people shouldn't take that as, oh, the culture war is insignificant. It's not. The differences we have on immigration issues, on trans drugs for children and things like that's all really important, and it's going to be stuff that's hashed out in the years to come. The damage is being done now, and we have to talk about it. Agreed. But in the long run, if we don't have a country in which we can even have these conversations, what are we doing? What are we doing?
You know who you kind of remind me of?
Who?
That famous Liverpudlian Ringo Starr.
Ever since I grew my hair again, I'm having an early midlife crisis at 31, and I grew my hair and I bought a sports car. And ever since I've done that and got these glasses
and the shades,
I'm Ringo Starr.
I love Ringo Starr. That's a high compliment.
Me too.
And Jack, I know we're just about out of time, but I want to plug your book one more time, The Truth Teller. Everybody, go out and get a copy of this. Where can they find this book, Jack?
Amazon, I think Barnes and Noble. And here's what I'll say about this book. I didn't write this for profit. I'm not making money with this thing. I took out weeks and weeks, and I did this in 7 weeks last summer.
That's amazing.
I went to a hotel. My wife spent time with family, and I bashed it out in 7 weeks. And that was time that I took off work. And since then, I'm not really making money from it because I've spent more than I will have ever make from this book donating to Team Kennedy. So this is a project of real love for the Kennedy campaign. And what I would say is anybody who wants this is buy it and give it to somebody, because it's designed to change people's minds. And I know that it has already. And if you can't afford it, if you're on a fixed income or anything like that, please DM me on Twitter, X, and I'll just send you one for free.
And you sent me a copy for free, and thank you, because I enjoyed this book so very much, and because it wasn't just about Kennedy. It's interesting that you wrote this in only 7 weeks, because usually I'm a vociferous reader, and I can usually tell when a book is rushed,
Right.
But it's so well written and so well thought out. I would think that you took a year writing this book, and yet I know you didn't. Please tell people where they can find you and support you and follow you online.
Sure. Really just Twitter or x.com/Jack Buckby, Buckby. You can find all my old books on Amazon, jackbuckby.com. Please do take a look.
Oh, yeah. And you also do a podcast with our mutual friend, Aaron Everett.
I keep forgetting to mention that. Yeah,
Aaron
Everett.
Plug that too.
You know what? I've met such amazing people through the Kennedy campaign. It's everyone has been so welcoming and so willing to listen to someone with as wild a story as me, and we barely even got into it. And you're one of those people. Aaron's one of those people. We do a podcast usually every Thursday called The Truth Tellers. You'll find it on Spotify.
I really like that podcast. I love your work. I love Aaron's work. I do love being involved with this campaign because it's just such a diverse group of people who agree on the big stuff. And we are indeed strange bedfellows. This show is aptly named. And you're right. We barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about. And I want a full 2 hours with you next time when we can really dig deep. So please do come back and join us again here on Strange Bedfellows. Jack Buckby, it has been my pleasure. Thank you so much. I almost called you Ringo. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you back here next Saturday night at 9. Until then, peace. Good night, everybody.
In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.